Then there's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus in conversation about their lives, their legislative priorities, policies, and other related issues that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. In the little paperback book that he distributed to everyone at the Capitol a couple of years ago called Yiddish for Legislators, Senator Robert Hertzberg walked us well-meaning Gentiles through the A to Z definitions of Yiddish words and phrases that are often used in Jewish households, like Olterkocker and Verblonget.
Verblonget.
And Ongepochket and other familiar, other familiar Yiddish words like L'chaim and Meshugana and Shlomiel. But there is one word in that book of Yiddish that caught my eye, toklis, which means getting to the point, to the heart, to the substance of the matter. And I guess if we're going to match certain Yiddish words and phrases to certain people, Senate Majority Leader Emeritus Bob Hertzberg most definitely personifies the meaning of toklis. He has spent a career in government and the private sector. We could dare say it's his destiny to get to the point, to the substance of a matter, and to do the homework and recruit the team that helps him transition from the marketplace of ideas and strategies to the impactful satisfaction of new laws and policies that affect Californians, in particular, in the 21st century. Senator Hertzberg has been representing the communities of the San Fernando Valley, also known as the 18th Senate District, including Van Nuys, the city of San Fernando, parts of Burbank, where he has lived and who he has mind melded with for a large part of his more than 50 years in politics and the private sector. He refined his political chops early on as a driver for the California legend Mervyn Dymally, as Dymally was running for lieutenant governor of California at the time, and then his service and leadership at the local level in L.A. and at the state level, including a term as Speaker of the California State Assembly in the early 2000s, as a gubernatorial advisor to former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, and, of course, as a state senator since 2014. And I say has been representing because Majority Leader Emeritus Robert Hertzberg is leaving legislative office in early December after an exceptional legislative career in both houses. And on this edition of Then There's California, we'll look back with Senator Hertzberg on his achievements on both the public and private sector platform over the years, and more insight into the recipe for the secret sauce of taking risks and exploring ideas that truly identify Robert Hertzberg as toklis. So this toklis Senator Majority Leader joins us by phone from Los Angeles. Do you identify with toklis? Is that a compliment?
I do. It's a compliment. Exactly right.
How you been? Things going okay for you?
Yeah, things are good. Look, I'm an old school warrior. I don't, nothing bothers me. I just, I got a clear focus on why I'm in public service, and I'm always having a good time, always keeping a positive upbeat, and always pushing the envelope, and getting out there and really putting everything I got on the field.
Hey, listen, a couple of times over the years, including at least once when you've joined me on this podcast previously, you have referred to this classic looking to the future metaphor of the guy who jumps off the 50-story building, and as he's falling, some guy in the 11th floor leans out of the window and yells out to him, "How's it going?" And the guy falling responds, "So far, so good." And you have always said that guy was you. So I know it's been a political lifetime since you and I talked about that. Does that metaphor of life still mean something to you?
100%, especially in public service. I've talked to you about the books that I've written and still writing. And one of the sections I talk about, it says batting 999.
Yes.
If you were a baseball player and you batted 999, you were the greatest player in the game at 999. What happens in politics, which is the metaphor of jumping out the window, is that the folks in politics often are scared of swinging that bat because the one time that you swung and you missed, they put a television ad up. That Hertzberg swings wildly. He couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, and the reality is that unfortunately informs a lot of, I think, one of the great weaknesses of being involved in elected office. And I would suggest, since coming back after being gone for 12 years, that is worse than ever. That everybody is scared to challenge anybody. Everybody's scared to ask the tough questions, even of your best friends. And it hurts the public debate. It hurts this great brand that we have called California. But that what happens now, particularly more with the internet and a whole host of other things, there's a real chilling effect on the creativity and imagination of what it takes to continue to support that brand, to support who we are and what we're about. And I would suggest that if you look at Silicon Valley, you look at all the great inventors and the great thinkers, you win them and you lose them. In my book, Working Clothes, it opens up and it talks about people in Silicon Valley work in two-story buildings so that when they fail and they jump out the window, they only sprain an ankle. You got to worry about spraining an ankle. And it has, in fact, been what has informed my history. It is what has hurt me politically because I've taken on people where I thought they were wrong, even though my friends. And the whole theory that Benjamin Franklin talked about when says you have a republic, if you can keep it, there's a value to that. You're supposed to have, represent the community you represent. You're supposed to listen to folks. You're supposed to be responsive, but you're also supposed to push the envelope. And it's been my experience. There's just not enough envelope pushing around.
As we got ready to record this episode with you, I've been reading through that book you published last year, Working Clothes. It's, of course, a treasury of op-eds written by you and with others over the past couple of decades, as well as articles and profiles about your legislative work as a lawmaker and an assembly speaker. And the book is a reminder and an affirmation of your philosophy and your efforts towards making important and logical public policy ideas a reality, even if they were ideas that were initially not believed by others to be viable or achievable. And somehow you made many of them a reality and you helped them into law. Redistricting reform and simple majority state budget and building infrastructure and modernizing our voting systems. It took work, it took struggle, but through this persistence and collaboration, you, and by extension California, made it happen.
That's right. And it's hard, and the important point of that book that I put together, and the reason I did it, I was leaving government. I wasn't running for office again. I was done. I was cooked. And the reason for me doing this was to pass on the lesson to the next generation of leaders. What was that message? The message, basically, in as simplest terms, is don't think that you're going to be somebody who's going to be a great leader if all you do is call press conferences or simply follow the parade. And so the first half of the book is ideas that we never thought would work. And the second half of the book are ideas that didn't work, because you have to have the courage to show people. And my message to the folks who I want to read this is have the courage to make a mistake. Have the courage to jump out of the building and take that risk. And I just think it's so critical to have that, because that then informs, in my judgment, great policy, because you'll win them and you'll lose them, and that's the way it'll work. But at the same time, you'll do great things and push the envelope. And that's what you got to do to be a great leader.
And part of that pushing of the envelope, as you and I have talked about before, is, and you even talk about it in the book, course correction.
The first book was looking backwards to say, here's some history where somebody like me, and hopefully new leaders will do the same, where they go along and they sometimes win them and sometimes lose them, but you show that you can make big progress. And the course correction book is looking to the future. The basic premise is that the social contract that we've all agreed to, that we're going to give up certain authority to government, it's for freedom, for opportunities, for education, for public safety and the like, that there's a trade-off in that regard. And that social contract makes sense. It works. It's smart. It's intelligent. But we need to be course corrected, because there's a bunch of stuff that's happening in society that's different. So you don't bellyache. You just figure it out, fix it, and course correct, or get the hell out of the way. But what's happened so much, and what I've experienced, which has been so frustrating to me, is how many folks, even now, so much worse since I've been back in government. I was in government for only 6 years. Literally, I haven't served any longer than anybody else, but I was in government and then left for 12 years, traveled the world, and then came back.
Right.
And coming back, what I found, people, when I started introducing bills, they were saying, well, who's the sponsor? I said, where is the sponsor? It's my idea. What are you talking about? Well, you have to have a sponsor. You have to have a sponsor. And so everything was about a sponsor, which basically means that we're giving up power to these outside interest groups and let them decide if they're going to give you a scorecard that says you're good or bad at something. Well, I don't like those damn scorecards, because what it means, you parked your brain at the door. It means that you haven't questioned. If somebody walks in your office, they say to you, well, we want you to support this bill on this issue. And as a consequence, you just do it. You just react and say, oh, okay, that's what you want. I'll do it. Versus, well, wait a second. I appreciate your philosophy. I appreciate where you're coming from. But the truth of the matter is, maybe we should fix that. Oh, you can't fix this. This is our plan. And I've been in situations and I've had people come against me in very significant ways because I haven't agreed, not with their underlying philosophy, but I haven't agreed with their approach to how to solve a problem. And hence, it gets to the issue of what I said about these interest groups controlling stuff and about parking your brain at the door rather than being somebody who actually contributes and brings your judgment to the table and make better legislation, better laws, better public policy.
Well, one thing I was struck by rereading through the book is how resonant and relevant some of the subject of those past op-eds are in our current time, fixing our initiative process, fixing, as you call it, our dumb traffic ticket system, bail reform, a 10th UC campus, creating a smaller LA Unified School District, climate change, conservation, rich-poor divide, homelessness. Many are still challenges here in the early 2020s, and even you acknowledge many of them are a work in progress still. Are you surprised that many of the issues on the agenda haven't been fully crossed off the to-do list as well?
Look, these are often perplexing problems, and you continue to work on them. But also, for example, let's take a look at what's happening right now. What's happening right now is we're in a situation where we've got voting problems, right? People are upset because it takes so long to vote, and they're undermining confidence. When I was speaker, we had the Al Gore situation with hanging chads. And so what did we do? We found out that 53% of the machines we had in California had a similar hanging chad problem that they had in Florida. So what did we do? We said, okay, let's fix it. So we fixed it. I also wanted to do something on same-day registration. Well, we got to 15 days. Now we actually have same-day registration. Well, now we've got some course correction that's required because now there's a real confidence problem in some of those reforms that we did. A lot of the reforms that we worked on way back when dealing with campaign finance. Well, we now have campaign finance situation where all these outside interest groups, independent expenditure committees, they're called, are funding all these campaigns, in part because it's the Supreme Court. So part of those perplexing problems is just the underlying challenges of democracy are what they are, and you've just got to keep at it and keep pushing at it. And what happens is outside interest groups don't want to do it, so I can't go do something because this group doesn't want me to do it, or this group's against it, or whatever the case may be. And I just think that's a real tragedy for a place as important as California.
Well, in fact, you've had a lot of legislative hallmarks over your career, successes in trying to achieve progress and the challenges that we've already talked about. You and I could spend 2 hours talking about your legislative greatest hits, but even just from this last term, your time here in the Senate, everything from your gun safety bill this year, SB 1327, your bail and immigration bail reform bills, SB 968 and SB 10, the California Privacy Act that you co-authored, the Assembly bill, and even the BOT Act of 2018. So you really do have a great track record. Any of those, as I'm reading them off here, that seem pearls of pride for you as we talk about them?
Well, it's interesting because it took me 6 years to work on bail. And it got caught up in a whole different wave of things and other people interpreting stuff and the Supreme Court making decisions in certain ways that were problematic. But I took the risk. What happened is it got interpreted in a totally wrong way in the sense that my whole purpose was only caring about poor people. When a poor person is put in jail because they can't afford, they're not a flight risk, they're not a public safety risk, but they can't afford to get out and their life gets turned upside down. They can't pay their rent, they can't take care of their family, they have to cop a plea to get out because they're sitting in jail. It's just a real tragedy when somebody else who's got a checkbook can do that. But then it got all messed up and mucked up. And it got mucked up. It was so interesting that I never anticipated. It wasn't just a problem that happened with respect to the bail companies being upset, but the left didn't think I went far enough because they were afraid, oh my God, judges have more authority, and they came against me. So I had both the left and the right coming against me. And some of those things, look, again, you take these risks and put your neck out. But, when I talked to Howard Berman about this, former congressman, served in the legislature from 1972 to 1982, and, he said, Hertzberg, you're crazy to introduce bail. I tried to do it years ago, and I had my head handed to me. And he was right, but he was also wrong because it was necessary thing to do. And the other thing I want to share that I think is really important to understand for legislators and for others is that, again, I'm so much against the press release play. I spent 900 hours working on privacy, killing myself to get to an agreement. And where did that come from? Because of the work that I did when I was Speaker, the Speaker's Commission on Initiative Reform, and I saw it was so important, which I did in 2000. I came back, and we came up with a reform with Senator Steinberg, Senator Padilla, before he went off to Secretary of State to fix the initiative process. So we wanted to take stuff off of the ballots. So I was dispatched by the pro tem because she felt that the privacy initiative that Alistair McTaggart, who's become one of my best friends, would have been problematic. And so I worked like crazy, got it off. But guess what? It wasn't my bill. You know, I had to give it to an assembly member, and it was an AB, an assembly bill instead of a Senate bill, in order to build a coalition to necessarily do things. The last couple of months of the legislature, Senator Ben Allen, had been working brilliantly on this plastics recycling measure for 4 years. And basically the whole month with Ben, worked around the clock. Governor's office said, no chance, it's never going to happen. And we got it done. But guess what? It's Ben Allen's bill. We gave a piece of it to Luce Rivas, who came along, who was the chair of natural resources. And I worked my heart out of it. And so often you've got to, the lesson to members and anybody who listens to this, don't think about legacy. Don't think about having your name on stuff. Think about fixing problems. Pay the price. Do whatever it takes in an ethical and lawful way. But work with others. Give other people credit. I would suggest that a large part of measures that I worked on, all the environmental stuff at the end, and the end of session with my last few days, you know, my name's not on any of that stuff. And that's just what you got to do. That's what you got to do. I mean, all I can do in an interview like this is, the purpose of it is not about me, but to hopefully pass the torch to the next generation and have them learn from those lessons. You know, one of the things I'll share with you,
yes.
One of the big things that caused me to run for office that you know way back when was training of members and training of staff. All of us in our lives, whether doctors or lawyers or accountants or acupuncturists or whatever, nurses or whatever we do in life, we have to continue to learn. Our jobs change, training. And so I built the Capitol Institute in the Assembly as Rules Committee Chairman, Speaker. And one of the great things I was able to do, and Tony Atkins is really big on this, the current pro tem, was we need to build a training institute. And so we called it the Senate Academy. And I was just up in Sacramento the other day when the first session of the training and taking them on a tour and training the new members at the Senate Academy. And now we have an extensive Senate Academy. It's working extremely well because so many of the senators who are elected have never served in government before.
Right.
You'd served in the Assembly and then you moved to the Senate. You didn't need a training, and senators think they're more important because they get a bigger title or whatever. But now, if you looked at the class, there was only 2 members that I had that came from the Assembly, and both were Republicans. The others were all brand new people who never served in the state before. And so I'm trying to impart that. That's why when I left, I did the working clothes. Problems are nothing more than opportunities in working clothes. To try to send that message. It wasn't about me. It was about trying to pass the torch to other folks. And you said I started when I was a young kid with Merv Diamond as a driver in 73 and 74. You know, and I listened and I learned and I listened and I learned. So much of what's happened in society because of the internet and the like, there's no longer, like we always talk about how important it is for indigenous people. One of the great things about indigenous people is they passed lessons from generation to generation, and they showed great respect for their elders. And the elders were listened to because they had the information. There was no writing. There was no message other than passing it on in those ways. And today, where you've got the kid who knows the computer and has to roll their eyes at their grandparents, you know, it's right. A different culture. And it's impacted the legislature in terms of people coming up and having all the answers. And they should have a right to express their opinion. But there also has to be respect for the institution and figuring out how democracy works to be able to serve us in our best interest.
And I agree with you. You are the last person I would think of when we talk about needing to leave a legacy. But I guess you could say your legacy is the training institutions that you've established and the theme of consensus that you have worked on over all these years to get work done.
That's right. And the other thing is, you know, so many things that I think are important, you know, that you work on, like on Vail. Vail didn't make many political contributions. This is the right thing to do. Or working on the training. I remember when I was doing training, trying to put the Capitol Institute together. The question was, why do you want to train Republicans? Well, because you want to train everybody to make the institution better. It's about the institution. I said, well, if they get elected and they don't know what they're doing, what's the purpose of being here, right?
Right.
So it's very hard. You know, the 3 things that I worked on that the pro tem assigned me to the last months of my time after I moved out of majority leader. One was the Capitol building that I've been working on for 4 years. That is so important to get it done right. And so I've spent a lot of time working on that. That doesn't get many votes or contributions or awards from organizations when I'm carrying their water. The second thing was getting measures off the ballot. We were able to do the medical malpractice off the ballot. We were able to get plastics off the ballot and get some other ones not to go on the ballot, which is also, again, things that were really important. And the third was the Training Institute, building what we called and branded the Extended Academy. Again, more institutional stuff. But you got to divide your time, I would suggest to others. between those loftier, important elements that contribute to the common good in the long term and support the institution, and not just worry about hustling one group or another, trying to get support from this group or that group, or this on the left or the right. It matters not. It's respect for the process. It's respect for the members. And it's just, it's a real tragedy that I'm hoping will correct over the coming years.
You mentioned the great state of California. Let's talk about the great state of California and the great city of Los Angeles, both places you have called home all your life. What's your perspective as you're ready to leave office on the past and the changes ahead for your native state and your native and beloved home of Los Angeles?
You know, I try to be philosophical about this. You know, everybody who's the older guy thinks that the next generation is going to come in and screw it up. And they have every right to run the world the way they want to run the world. It's up to them. Welcome to democracy. So I'm not somebody who's so critical about that. I am worried about the structural problems we face, which I've been working now on 12 years on tax reform, because the volatility creates a dynamic where you have all these downturns, and then it's just, you know, you want to create new taxes, and then you chase people out of California. There's debating, there's kind of dueling ideas. Are people really leaving or not really leaving? What does that look like? Is it just the old people grumbling? I don't know. Hopefully the new people coming in actually have ideas rather than just, you know, I always look at, again, I'm a globalist. I worked in Egypt for 6 years as agricultural technology, and I was really interested in the Arab Spring, where everybody came there behind the Hilton Hotel by the Nile, and that big, huge rally, and they wanted to throw government out. But no one had an idea of what to do next, right? What I'm interested in what are your visions for next? What are your visions for the next thing? And fine, you have every right to try to make it work. I have no grumble with that. But I hear it's just, you know, it's this anti-establishment. It's quite challenging and not really offering a real set of ideas of what to do. What's your idea on blockchain and technology, and where are we going there? And what about workers? And how do you get them paid and deal with that? What kind of tax structure do you use to make sure you have a viable economy that works? What's going to happen when the next downturn's coming, which it's coming shortly, to be able to promote economic activity? What are you doing on water, where we're in really big problems? And what's your bigger picture strategy? What's your timeline to get it done? You know, all of those bigger questions that are now informed by the internet and tweeting and little snippets of information that don't have the depth of thinking, which goes back to my point of God being in the details. What is your plan? That's why I spent so many years thinking about this stuff and looking forward on course correction, offering up a bunch of ideas, some which work, some may not work, but at least I'm in the marketplace of ideas, as you suggested at the outset of this interview. And that, to me, is what's so important. Having the ideas, having the gumption and the guts to do the homework, to flush out the ideas, to see what works and what doesn't, and have the guts to put them forward, even against the status quo, to folks, and try to invent the future, which is so critical and so much of what we're about in California. And it concerns me a little bit. But look, you know, we'll see what happens and see what the next generation does and how they handle it. I'm hoping to God they do a great job.
Beautifully put. Final question here, coming full circle. We started this conversation talking about Yiddish words and phrases. And there's a phrase in Hebrew that I've become familiar with since the pandemic began, and I've said it here in this podcast a couple of times, Gam Zul Iltova, which, if I'm translating it correctly, means this too shall be for the good. So considering everything we've talked about so far and your instinctive willingness to risk and explore ideas, and here we are in this crazy, chaotic, pandemic-recovering, democracy-defying world that we're trafficking in right now here in 2022, can we continue to work together across the aisle and course correct and make our ideas reality?
I share two thoughts. One, this great book written by Clifton Fadiman. Clifton Fadiman was the editor-in-chief of the Encyclopedia Britannica, for those who listen who understand what that even was. And brilliant guy, and he became one of the brain trusters for FDR. And back in the 30s, he put together a book called Living Philosophies. And he asked a bunch of people, then all men, write in 2 or 3 pages what their philosophy of life is. And then he did it 50 years later, men and women, asking them their philosophy. And in both editions, he started out with Albert Einstein. And the opening line of Albert Einstein's 2 or 3 page for Living Philosophy was, strange is our situation here on this planet. Each of us arriving for a short period of time, not knowing why, yet somehow seeking to divine a purpose. And the question is that purpose just to self-promote, so you get your name in the paper? Is the purpose to try in this short nanosecond that we're here to try to make a contribution for the common good? I don't believe there's such a thing as legacy. Go ask how many people even know who Pat Brown was in a poll. Go ask people, show them a picture of Jack Kennedy. Nobody knows. You ask people, what are the three branches of government? A third of them can't answer it. That's not the issue. If you're here at a time where you're holding power, you have an opportunity to do things using every skill set that you bring to the table, and what can you do to make it better? And I'm hopeful that the next generation does it. We've had leadership where you had great leaders, and you've had leadership where you've had crummy leaders. And the democracy is an unstable process because it's relying on individuals. And sometimes things come together where you just have a coalition of people that come together brilliantly. And so sometimes you find people that do that, and sometimes you don't. And that's the price of democracy. And one generation can screw it up badly. We saw a president just dramatically impact the democracy and put it at risk. And, maybe get another president in a couple of years that does great things and brings it together in new and incredible ways. So it's all about the human condition. And, I'm hopeful. I have confidence in human beings. And I think that the pendulum swings back and forth. And I'm just hopeful that we can keep it together. Athens only lasted 200 years.
That's right. Well, we're 200 plus here in America, and we're on our way. I am very grateful for your humanity and for your service here in the legislature and the pleasure of working for you and with you all of these years. I hope our paths continue to cross, and I wish you well in Southern California. Continue to be talkless in the future, Bob Hertzberg, and thank you again for joining us here on Then There's California.
Green Jeans, you're the greatest. Thanks.
Bob Hertzberg, he is the State Senate Majority Leader Emeritus, representing California, the San Fernando Valley. He's a man of the world, too. That wraps this edition of Then There's California. We are proud to have technical and production assistance and great ideas from Martin Ashley, Bob Brulty, Brian Shadden, Ann DeGrazia, John Roman, Lisa Murphy, McLeana Woods, and the graphic artistry of Tim Davis. I'm Brian Green from the state capitol in Sacramento. Thanks for listening to Then There's California.